David, and you also mentioned as part of 90 days plan to consider getting on people's podcasts, and you had an amazing ride of doing 300 in 2 years, which is a lot of work. What advice would you give to someone who wanted to implement what you taught them in terms of getting on podcasts?
Okay.
They set a goal of getting on 300 podcasts in 2 years. What should they do?
Yeah, sure. Well, you can start with getting on one podcast, and I would say don't aim for the stars straight away. It comes back to what I said. If I was going to start from the beginning, you have to be clear on who you help. You have to be clear on the number one problem you solve for them. And then that should suggest the topic. So when you reach out to a podcast host, here are the things I look for when someone reaches out to me. What's the topic? Don't just say, I want to be on your show, but what's the headline? And then what's the one paragraph or the bullet points that might get me interested? You might have 3 topics, so you might offer 3. That's fine. But usually you're pitching a topic, and then brief bio, like what's unusual about you that might be in, like one woman reached out to me, and I didn't find out until we were in the interview that she bought an Enfield 500 motorcycle and rode it around India for 3 years. I want to talk to someone who did that. That sounds amazing. And there was other stuff that she'd done that sounded so cool. So what's something that might be unusual about you or interesting that's going to have you stand out from everyone else? And then the third thing, give them a sample of you. It could be a 1-minute audio recording of you speaking about a topic, so that they can see that you can string 2 words together and you sound engaged and animated, like because some people aren't born speakers. So you could have a friend interview you and record a little bit of it down to say 1 minute or 2 minutes, and then include that link. Here's a sample of me speaking. And then you can reach out to the small podcasts first. You could go and research and find the ones on your topic and then pitch them. Some of them have a suggest a speaker form, and you reach out, and all you need is one. Just get one. You know, it might be a podcast that's starting out and they've got a very few listeners, but you get the practice. You can also have a friend interview you so that you get practice at answering questions, and so you don't get stumped. I used to follow a teacher who would do a TV interview with no preparation, and I was stunned. I'm like, how could you possibly do that? I'd want to know every possible question and prepare my answers. But now, 20 years later, that's how I do my podcast. I don't prepare. Sometimes I send questions ahead of time. I don't read them. I just come and I trust that whatever's going to come out is going to be useful in the moment. Now, you don't have to start there. You can actually write down the questions you'd like to be asked. You can even send those to the podcast host. These are the questions that I would suggest, and you're welcome to add any questions to it. And then do your first interview, and then see how it goes. And then maybe you'll listen to it and go, oh yeah, I kind of like some of my answers to that, and I think I could improve that. And then what I do, my method is I don't usually do cold approaches, because I've been in the game for a long time. So I have a network. So I just started reaching out to people and say, do you know any podcast hosts? And then I came up with my own research method. I would take someone I knew, like Jack Canfield from Chicken Soup, and I'd look at the podcasts he's been on, and then I'd reach out to them. Now, if you don't have a network like that, then you might have to go cold approach. But then once you've done one, now you know one podcast host. And if you did a good interview, you could ask them if they've been on any other shows, or even better, go and do your research and find out what shows they've been on, because they can't remember. They can never remember. I've been on 300. I could tell you the names of maybe 2 podcasts I've been on. I can't remember them. So don't ask me to suggest podcasts for you. Go and do your own research and see what shows that host has been on. You could also look through their guest list, because you can see all their episodes and see all those guests. it takes a bit more work, but you can ask them if any of those people have shows of their own, and then see if they're a fit for you. And what I do is I come up with a wish list. So let's say I'm on your podcast, I'm on Chris's podcast, do some research, and I find 5 podcasts that you've been on or hosts that have been on your show that'll be a fit for me. And then I'll reach out and say, hey, if you think I'd be a good fit for these shows, would you be open to making an introduction? In fact, I'll make it easy for you. Here's a draft introduction that you can forward. Here's a couple of paragraphs, my one sheet, my picture, and my link to a sample interview. And most people are like, oh yeah, if you make it that easy for me, I won't introduce you at all 5, but here are 2 people I know are always looking for guests. Yeah, you got it. And you can start reaching out person by person by person, one podcast host at a time, and building it up. That's how I did 300. We do an interview and say, all right, would you be willing to make some intros? And then often they do, and boom, I'm straight in with a warm introduction.